Hey you, welcome back to the channel. And today guys, we're going to explore has or possibly has an age-old issue with the Star Trek transporter being resolved, or will it be resolved? And this is going to be a highly speculative video guys. Of a pet peeve of mine. And I'm hoping this series can resolve that. It may not. More likely it might not. But I can be hopeful anyway. So let's talk a little bit about the transporter we have here in Star Trek Discovery. Photos were released of the set and what transporter would look like. It's very different, very strange from what we've seen transporters look like. Also, Star Trek Discovery has taken many other liberties on the look of Star Trek in a prequel setting. Nothing really seems part of the continuity of the story, right? Some people say it resembles more the J.J. Abrams type movies, right? Some say, it really doesn't seem to fit in any of the timeline as we know it, the Kelvin or the Prime timeline or otherwise. It's like it's just something totally, new of its own, different. So, if that's the case, and they've taken those liberties, as it were, and they've also just changed totally any look of a transporter we can imagine. I mean, even if you go back to Star Trek Enterprise, when they had the first person to invent a transporter, it doesn't look anything reminiscent of this or anything like this. But this is just a weird, strange looking transporter. It has these large disc type things, and the way it's structured, it looks like this is probably going to spin. That's what it looks like to me. It looks like it might create some type of spinning mechanism. And there almost seems like a aperture here behind Captain Yeoh of the Shenzhou that maybe focuses some type of beam. Maybe it's a scanner or what have you, or maybe it looks just like that as part of the crank, apparatus or whatever. Anyway, let's just talk about a continual problem that's been with transporters, and if this series may address that. If it does, I would be so happy if it does. Something tells me it may not. But anyway, let's explore, try to get an idea of why this looks like this, try to come up with some reasons, what's going on, and if the transporter may solve a big philosophical issue. So let's first deal with a little bit of quick history of the transporter. We know that the transporter system was created initially during Gene Roddenberry's creation of Star Trek. It was created because of large budget constraints. With the Star Trek series, they wanted to just use shuttles, which I think would have worked a great deal better. They didn't have the budget, so they said, well, let's just kind of let them show up on the planet. Let's have them appear there, beam there. And so the transporter was created out of necessity. There was really no science, to back it up until years later, when a lot of theories came up on how this thing could really work. But, basically in short, we never really got a strong philosophical reason as to why this thing exists. It created a lot of problems. If it was breaking down your matter and recreating it someplace else, much like a replicator, or even like how we have 3D printers today where we can reassemble things out of the same material, but we understand when we do that's material someplace else, that is not the exact same material that was reassembled, wherever the teleportation came, or the printing, the data was sent over to print the particular, object, or what have you. And the issue, guys, the issue with all of this is that, so then is it really you who's beaming over there, or is it just some type of duplicate or some type of recreation, of you, which, seems like, more likely it would be that. And, if it wasn't, then would it be, would your consciousness, whatever creates your consciousness, would that be part, of the transport? Would that actually go over, or is there no actual consciousness as we know it? And so it would just technically be you, as it'll be the same pattern, same pattern of information, so to speak. With that work. So a lot of philosophical issues arise with transportation. Some that seemingly have and may never be solved. And so, will this be addressed? Will it continually be the destruction of the original person going into the transporter and somebody else arriving, or some being like you arriving on the other end of the transporter? So some people have came up with some other ideas about the transporter, some ideas that would put a lot of concerns for me at rest, but also would make a lot more sense, especially since from what I'm getting from this Star Trek, they don't mind taking liberties on what they're doing with the look of the show and the feel of the show. I mean, there are a lot of stuff out of continuity. You look at the bridge, for instance, it's a great deal more updated than the 1960s bridge. I know a lot of people say, well, hey, come on, you can't hold a standard to that. You've got to, change, change those things, to update the show. That was a 1960 show. And, yeah, that's true. That's very true. But there have been cases where, in the continuity of things, people have gotten away with that. We recall back to the Star Trek Deep Space Nine situation where Cisco goes back to the bridge to deal with the Tribbles, and they actually are part of the crew of Captain Kirk's crew, and through some time travel situation, and the setting looks exactly like it looked in the 1960s in the Star Trek, 1960 or the original series look. So they didn't seem to have a problem with it then. But of course, how this show looks, there's liberties on the continuity of what it looks like. But as well, I wonder then, would it be possible for them to just go ahead and deal with this transporter issue by changing the way it functions? And if you guys are familiar with a movie called Event Horizon, this set feels a great deal about Event Horizon in this movie, science fiction movie in the mid-90s. I believe it dealt a lot with black holes and time travel and ships traveling to furthest reaches of the galaxy, much like a transporter does. Transporter sends you to different locations at different speeds, right? If we recall, in Star Trek II of the J.J. Abrams reboots, or Star Trek Into Darkness, Khan had this interdimensional transporter, which not only just transported him to a location, a different location or a different spot, it just transported him, I believe, all the way back to the Klingon home world, if I remember correctly. So this thing defies not just space and time, it defies distance, and so what I'm getting at, guys, is I think it would be great if, since they're already taking liberties with Star Trek as it is, why not resolve this issue? If this transporter was some type of device that could create a type of black hole slash wormhole, that it could create maybe enough energy through this aperture or whatever this thing does, and kind of more or less open up a gateway to where they're really just passing and slipping through dimensions or wormholes or something to that effect, where their actual being is moving through this wormhole at different points and different locations, just like the Stargate world, how it's worked in Stargate. And I think that would be an interesting way to address that. Now, the reason I think that this won't happen is because as we look at the teleportation transporter effects, it looks very much like what you would get in a standard transportation. So that puts me in the mind of breaking down the matter, creation of matter, which again doesn't solve the issue. However it goes, I'm on board to see how this thing works. What it does, if they can give some explanation of why it needs to look like this, other than it just looking kind of strange and you're looking like a big gong. Maybe they could give some very technical information as to why it looks like that. I'm pretty sure that they've had a consultant on board. The Next Generation and the other Star Treks, they would have people like, I believe, Professor Krauss, and so I'm sure that there's a practical reason why this thing looks like this. There's a explanation other than it just being this weird set design. Maybe it's an alien ship, but I believe the Shenzhou does look like much more like a standard Federation ship in design, but maybe it could be a collaboration between themselves and maybe some other alien race. Maybe there's an alien race that comes up with the technology first and they have to use some variation of it. But anyway, guys, tell me what you think about the look of the transporter. Has the transporter technology ever bothered you with the destruction of the person on the end of the transporter being recreated, and we're trying to figure out if it's really us, and if it's just a matter of being able to reconstruct the same patterns and information, then they can just create multiple copies of the person, much as like we've seen happen in many other Star Treks. And a lot of times we've seen the Star Trek shows where they split people in half. But if we really think about that for a moment, if it can just create people like that based on if it's kind of material and matter, it would seem that it should be able to recreate and store and create as many copies of that person as needed without the transporter splitting their atoms in various parts. But anyway, guys, tell me what you all think about the look of the transporter. Do you like it? Do you think it's going to work and do the same thing it's done with the other Star Trek shows? And guys, if you like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, take care.